everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tales of Agmar. I'm your host and creator, Sinjin. Today, we're going to be talking about how to put history into your storytelling world, as well as a little bit more specifics on why that's important. As I've elaborated before, it's pretty important for a few things, but before we dive too hard into that, let's get the announcements out of the way. As always, please come find us on Discord if you'd like to chat with us more or you've got questions about anything here or anything involving Tales of Agmar. Discord is going to be the best way to get in contact with me, no matter what platform you're on, is just a Tales of Agmar Discord. Pretty easy to find us. It's opened up as long as you've got a link, which is in the show notes below. Also, please check out the Ko-fi to support the show. Any support goes there, helps us out so much, as it is the best way to support the show at this time, while we get other bits and pieces up and running for the Tales of Agmar project. Also, you can find the chapters for the book on Royal Road, Ream, and Wattpad. They all have links down below. You can join those. Some of them let you do it for free without making an account, and other ones you have to make an account to read them, so it's just kind of up to you. None of the accounts cost any money, and accessing none of these chapters are going to cost you any money, as obviously the goal is to put the book out and have the book be for sale. And then also, on top of that, we are still hunting down a publisher, so if you know anyone in the publishing world, then definitely send them my way if you think they might be interested. And as always, please like, comment, subscribe wherever you find us. Let us know how you're thinking and feeling today. And Tales of Agmar is a show that drops every single Monday at 5 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. All right, let's get into this world building. So, first, the big idea. Past events, now this is in your world, right? It helps it feel lived in by your characters, as well as all of the, what we'll call NPCs that exist. Not just simple origin events for some characters. Obviously, your main characters are going to have some origin events. Some of your major minor characters are going to have some additional backstory events, reasons why they do what they do. But your world obviously needs reasons why stuff happens. Now, little caveat with this, obviously you don't have to explain every little tiny detail now. There's always in the future. There's always, if you end up releasing like some sort of fauna flora guide, if you release any sort of like histories, you can always have histories happen. That's all up to you. It is your thing. You decide how that goes. But just the idea here, right, is we need events in our world that help it feel lived in. Okay, so what this creates is the illusion for our reader that the world is larger. Okay, whenever you're writing, you're all about painting this idea inside your reader's head, or vocal storytelling, even telling on a movie screen. You want to be able to tell details outside of what you're showing and telling, obviously, or at least hint at these ideas, so that your reader wants to explore more of the world, wants to find out more of these hidden details. But I do want to point out that you do need to actually have bits where some things are explained, because if you just try to drop a bunch of visual clues or a bunch of like, oh, he saw this here, then that's not going to hit as many people. Now, some of those can be fun to find, fun to rewatch or reread books and stories, but if you're going to go and drop details, I suggest you have a varying amount of these different kinds of details. What I would consider like big details, kind of medium details, and small details, right? So big details is something that you're just going to tell the reader or the consumer, right, almost exactly what happened, almost verbatim, right? This is going to be like your final battle, big detail, right? Medium details, maybe someone knows a little bit about something that happened. That information gets passed on to like a character or is overheard by a character, but then maybe it doesn't get touched on for a few more books. And then all of a sudden it comes up again, and we've got to re-experience that reminder detail as well as the new information that the character sees. And then next is those little details, right? The little details, those are the small things that pop up here and there. Maybe it's the fact that your character always right punches, or the fact that they carry some sort of tiny medallion with them. Those are the things that are really going to make your world pop and then bring it to life. So let's do a little exercise here. I just want you to imagine here with me. Drop yourself into whatever world you're writing, and of course, it doesn't matter how large or how small it is right now. That's not a super big concern. But let's think about how your world began, and I'm not talking about like how you as the creator started to think of it, right? I'm talking about how like canon wise or lore wise inside your story, how did it happen? Does the world exist right now because there was some final battle and the bad guys won, right? Does it exist as a utopia state because the good guys won? Maybe actually got your own creation story, like Lord of the Rings and kind of Star Wars, as well as a few other ones where the world was crafted by some superpower, otherworldly beings, and they semi or don't even care about the world at all, right? Craft that right now in your head, or at least what that would look like. Obviously, now's the time that if you can, grab a pencil and paper or put a note in your phone or inside that journal and just write this down, this little exercise. Okay, this is just like little creative exercises that I did a lot at the beginning of Tales of Agmar, just telling little tiny stories about how things happened, mostly to myself, so that I could get an idea of how big this world was going to be, what needed to happen, why people did things they did, what makes other people align themselves different ways. That that's where this exercise extends from. Excuse me. Now, on top of all of that, let's think about, right, if you've got some normal people in there, and by normal I mean like no like godlike deities that had to craft the world for whatever reason, right? They can just craft the world to craft the world. Uh, are there choices in the beginning of your story that other people made, right? Choices that now are going to change the future of that world. We need to know those choices. Obviously, if your deities make certain kinds of choices, or some of them happen to fall for whatever reason, like a minor deity falls and becomes like the big bad, then that's going to be a thing that happens. And we have to somehow learn that at one point as the reader, or it should be mentioned, I would argue. Anyways, right? If you only view certain parts of Lord of the Rings, it's just a good example here. I'm no way sponsored by anything Lord of the Rings wise, just so everyone knows. But Tolkien, in writing the world, he had a lot of little details that he put in there that you can then go read other books, go find more about his universe, right? We want to create something like this. Obviously, I'm not saying you need to go full on out like how Tolkien did. Tolkien is a example of a very good and very extreme level of world building. We don't all have to hit that level. If you want to hit that level, totally fine. That's fantastic. Great dedication. I'm just saying you can get to a feeling of that kind of level just by adding in some more details, adding in some history, having that history be mentioned to players, or excuse me, not to players. Well, if it's a D&D campaign, to players, but to your readers, right? To whoever's consuming this story, then that needs to be mentioned so that they start to see that there is a bigger picture than just what's on the page. Or right, I guess we'll dive into some D&D campaigns, right? The players need to see that they're perhaps not the only heroes, unless they are the original heroes, right? Then the players need to know that they are sort of the original heroes in this universe, and that's a little bit unique, right? It's something that hasn't happened yet inside this section. And so those are just big details that you want to put in here, right? That people are going to be like, oh, okay, that's super interesting. I want to learn more, right? If you're going to do the whole, oh, these people are the first heroes, right? Then we need to know why they're the first heroes. Why did so and so decide to become a hero? Why do they want to fight back against the current ruling guy? Is the current overlord guy really that bad to the average person? This gives you a chance to sort of add some more depth to characters as well by just saying what has happened in the past and how the past ends up changing our future, which it does in the real world, and hence why your story should be affected by things like that. Now, we've got that out of the way. Just a quick reminder here and sort of continuing fleshing of the big idea. With adding history to your world, it's right? Like we want little bits of details here and there. We don't need you to lore dump a whole chapter on us. I just so that you guys can learn from my mistakes, I did do a whole lore dumpy chapter and brought it in front of a test audience in a classroom like setting, and it was cool. People are like, "Hey, that was a cool little lore dump," but most of the chapter was a lore dump, and I felt like that was too much. So if you're, currently writing anything and you're like, "Oh, I wonder if I lore dumped too much," it's highly possible that you did. But little lore dumps here and there, or a big lore dump done right, can be really helpful. But you have to build up enough points to it, right? As we go through Tales of Agmar, you might notice some parts where I get a little lore dumpy because this is book one. And like I've said before, book one needed to establish what we're working with world wise. It needs to be able to point out the sort of reoccurring themes of good versus evil, as well as just the state of the universe at the time of when this record is taking place. And so that's what book one does, right? A lot of book ones will feel like that to a degree, but you as an author, especially for your, or I mean, even movie wise, right? If you're going to drop down a movie or drop down some storytelling bits, your first little chunks could feel very lore heavy as you try to do that. And just the best way, in my opinion, to combat lore heaviness, get some action in there. Action can be good. Get some standard conversations, make it seem a lot more normal that this information is being shared and not so much that it's being forced upon whoever it's being shared to, and then the reader will feel very much the same. Okay, so running through some additional notes, I've just got three big notes here. They'll feel a little bit rehashy, but I just figured we'd stop for a minute, ground ourselves before we keep going into this, because we've got a lot to cover when it comes to doing history in the world and within stories. Number one, don't feel like you need to add a lot of story right off the bat, or excuse me, a lot of history right off the bat, right? We talked about writing things down in a journal in past episodes. If you've got a lot of history, map it out. Map it out for yourself so you know everything that happens. Your characters don't have to be history gurus on what is happening in your world, right? They just need to know enough to get them from point A to point B, which in turn means that your reader only needs to know enough to get them from point A to point B. And at point B, you can add a little bit more history so that the reader and the character can find out together if that's the format you're running from, right? If you're running from more of like a omnipresent storytelling type like that, right? That's the view you're using. Then, right, that's going to look a little bit different. However, I would still argue that you don't need to just be lore dumping all the time. You can like be telling your story, crafting out your story, and then the reader, as they are, viewing this story in an omnipresent way, can then find out as they go about the lore still. Okay, number two, small bits of history in the right place make for a bigger payoff versus what we've been talking about. We're just having like a huge chunk of history all down, like a massive timeline. That can be a lot for people to read when first getting into your world. Obviously, if you're going to drop stuff like that, you can always drop like a timeline on a website, or you can have sort of a lore compendium that you drop. It can have a timetable. People, or timeline, people really like those. I know I'm an enjoyer of lore compendiums when it comes to what I like to do. And so just run with that, right? Know that in the future you can always add more, and everyone's going to be like, no, like that makes sense, right? Like you don't have to tell us everything right now. Okay. And then the third and final one for this section, you're trying to add depth to the existing story, not just a whole nother story. Usually, right? You're usually not going to go and have us jump back into a time flash back in history every single time. I would say maybe 20% of the time you're going to have sort of that jumping back to the past and reviewing that a little bit. Do your best to blend that in, right? While also still letting us know that we did just jump back in time, because those can be confusing if not done correctly. All right. So I just wanted to take a look at some of our history to talk a little bit more about the progression of technology. Okay, so progression of technology can be, I know this is like a huge pivot point, but stick with me here. technology progression can be a very big thing within the history of your world. It can show stuff being developed and even stuff being de-developed because of consequences that have happened. Okay, so let's just take a look at dishwashing, okay, and specifically kind of how dishwashers came to be in our world, right? So first, people would kind of wash things in a river, right? And clean it off that way. And this is also like clothes washing, right? So we're especially clothes washing done in a river at first. Well, sorry, I'll central it down to clothes washing, okay? So first, we're washing it in the river, okay? That's our technology level in this world. Everyone washes clothes in a river. This is also a great way to show your reader the level of technology in your world without just flat out saying like, oh yeah, they're a fantasy society. You can be like, oh yeah, there's a woman, you know, using a rugged wooden washboard. Okay, we can kind of envision that in our head and tell, oh, okay, these people might not be at the same technology level as us, right? And then we kind of know they're in sort of a fantasy looking area where there's not a lot of iron used for everyday household materials, perhaps, right? Something like that within your world. Some little caveat that happens. Eventually, perhaps you need to show a slightly more evolved society, a little bit more progressive way, and we've got washing machines that are cranked by hand, okay, and they just crank them, and then the clothes get washed after some amount of time of them cranking, right? They get scrubbed themselves, yada 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 yada. Then we can hit the point where perhaps you need to have a steampunk sort of washing machine. You drop that in there, you say it's powered by steam. We now know that the race or faction you're talking about has that level of technology. We can kind of assume maybe what their standard of living looks like, and you can explain more of that as we go. Obviously, for Tales of Agmar, I ended up doing a podcast to explain a lot of these little details because I was just super excited. But book wise, little things like this still pop up to help explain what's going on, what things look like. Okay. And then, right, if we're still following our dishwasher little analogy, we jump to present day, we use electricity. In the future, perhaps clothes just don't get put in a washing machine. Maybe they wash themselves, that kind of thing. You can just work with this however it fits your setting. All right. Now, bits like this, okay, we're talking about showing natural progression through a world, especially if you're going to have a world that lasts like hundreds, thousands of years, and you need to do telling through that. There is going to be, I would argue anyways, some level of technology progression unless you have something stopping it, which is where this next bit comes in. We're going to talk about magic advancement, right? And then we'll talk a little bit more about how perhaps things could be stopped by like a mysterious dark force. Maybe there's a barrier that no one can break through and that causes other problems or focuses everyone's time on it. Those things can cause problems for the advancement of technology as well as the advancement of magic, I would argue. Okay, so if you're going to run a system that is very focused on, hey, we use magic, not technology, or we use magical technology, you should show a progression there as well. Because if everyone is using the same kind of spells, that doesn't always make sense. Now, if you have someone, and there are examples like this in media, but let's say you have someone that learned, the ancient magic and it focused on something entirely different than present day magic. For instance, maybe present day magic is very flashy and not quite practical, while ancient magic ancient magic was very practical and not so much flashy, or they didn't focus on like a certain kind of, technique, or they weren't just focused solely on killing. Maybe ancient sorcerers can use a powerful technique more often, except they don't just rely on killing or rely on instant hits. However you want that to shape your system. Okay, so basically when doing magic systems and magic advancement, my biggest thing, make the magic system work for you. Okay, you don't want to feel like you're working in someone else's magic system. You want to feel like you are working in your own magic system and that it can accomplish things that you can do. And so I spent easily like over the course of a few months slowly building up the magic system for Tales of Agmar and what that looks like, how that works in with the dragons being deities and all that, and lots of stuff behind the scenes. Go do the same. It's totally okay if you take a minute to kind of world build how your magic system is going to work, especially if you're doing the world building thing every day like you should be right now. That's going to help you come later when you're like, oh, like he wants to do this. Should he be able to do this? Or is this going to have to be like a new technique that he needs to learn, or she, right, within your universe? That's where you can add in great things like training arcs. I feel like training arcs are always a big thing that sometimes turns into like way too long of a training arc. That can always be a problem. But also no training arc and characters randomly powering up without a reason, right? You can have systems that if you're writing that kind of story where your reader, or not your reader, where your character powers up based off of experience like a video game. And if you're running something like that, maybe your training arcs look more like kind of bonus levels, so to speak, to unlock additional things. But we need kind of that power progression for our characters, because if everyone comes out looking 100% all the time, then it can be kind of rough to then believe later on when they're able to take down these end game kind of bosses. All right. Now, so just to finish up here, what's great about magic systems, this is my just last little bit about magic systems, right, is there are so many other systems out there people have developed. We've got so much to experiment with now as authors and readers. I'm assuming if you're an author, you read and consume other media to a degree. You've got tons of different things to experiment with, tons of things to mash together to then end up creating your own system that looks very unique, very fresh. I know everyone likes seeing the same thing happen again and again. It can be very cool for our minds. But if you can hit the iron right, so to speak, and create something different that still feels plausible within what everyone's reading today, then I would personally argue that you're going to get a lot more readers, because it's going to feel awesome and epic to them, and they're going to be entranced of, okay, what's different here? I'm really interested in what the different thing is. Like, for instance, right? You go throughout your day all the time. The only things you really notice throughout your day is the different things, right? If you wake up at a different time, your whole body notices. It can be kind of rough. It can be kind of good. Sort of depends on the day, right? If your magic system is going to hit different, that can be awesome for your readers. It can really pull a bunch of people in, keep them intrigued as they learn about this magic system that you have. All right. So we'll end it there. I don't want to go too much longer, folks, but thank you guys so much for tuning in. And don't forget to join us next week on Monday at 5 p.m. as we talk about some more finishing details for your world. Also, just another reminder here, if you've not checked out the book already, I highly recommend you do so. Sometimes reading other people's stories gets your own creative process going. And please listen till the end to help support Tales of Agmar. Till then, this has been St. John with, of course, Tales of Agmar. And wherever you are, be a good one.